All right, everybody, welcome back to the Live Ultralight podcast, powered by Outdoor Vitals. We, as in me and Brigham, are actually in the middle of a R&D research trip, I guess you could say. It's November. It's cold, but the hike in was phenomenal today.
Yeah.
But the idea today is we'll try to stay on topic, but recently posted a video about doing a solo 100-mile hike in the Wind River Range, and there was quite a few comments, and there's just some interest, I guess you could say, I would say in general, actually, any video I've ever done that's about solo hiking has done really well. There's lots of comments, and people talk to me about it in person. So today I thought, let's just talk about solo hiking and camping, because both me and Brigham have done a significant amount of that in the last 2 and 3 months, 2 months. So that's the generalized topic. But the setting that we're going to be talking about this in is we are at, I don't even know, 8,000 feet in the mountains in November.
So I checked on my internet. It's 7,300.
7,300. I was way off.
plus or minus 50, but we're in the heights of Zion National Park.
Yes. So we're up here at altitude. It's a little breezy. We are layered up from puffy pants to puffy jackets. We just had our dinner. The hike in, though, was amazing. We both walked in with, I think you had an altitude hoodie on, I had a turn hoodie on, and that was it.
Yeah.
When the sun was out, it was great. I had joggers on. I mean, it was very perfect temperatures for the hike in. The second that sun started to go down, it started to plummet.
Crazy. I mean, the sun was just approaching the horizon, and it dropped real fast.
Yeah. So we got some R&D things we've been, we'll be testing that we really wanted to make sure this trip happened this month. And I'd say I haven't fully utilized the pieces, but looking promising. But we'll report more in as we get closer to production on some of those things. But it's been
I think we'll know a lot more in the morning. When you wake up, you'll have a pretty good.
Yeah, between fabrics and design tweaks, there's some things to test and to evaluate out here. So, but yeah, what a trip! On the way up, I was joking with Brigham about how wool socks are just supposed to make your feet warm. That's the concept, right? If you put on wool socks, you get warm feet. And I was saying, we're driving in the truck, and I'm like, dude, my feet are not warm. They're colder than when I wear my regular polyester socks that I wear every day, right now. And I'm like, there's just such a bit of a misconception here. So how the feet doing over there, Brigham?
So my full cushion merino wool socks are not making my feet warm right now. They're cold. Yeah, they're just cold. Wasn't exposed to any external moisture. It's just from my own feet moisture, and they're cold.
Yeah.
And also, I'm just wearing trail runners and my wool socks, and it's a cold combination.
Yeah, you could be like me. I've got waterproof mid-height boots on, and then I put our down booties. I loosened them as loose as they could go and put my down booties on, and I would say I'm quite adequate.
I'm
not warm, but I'm adequate. I'm sure I'll warm up the second I get in a bag, but there's some funny misconceptions in the outdoor industry that I think are generalized statements that people take too far.
Yeah.
Wool socks being warm and warm when wet is definitely one of them, right?
Yeah.
I think that I don't know. My perspective of it was maybe that adage came from back when people were, I don't know, when my grandfather had a pair of wool socks. They were burly and thick and big and warm, compared to maybe other socks. But anymore, you can make wool into anything. You can make wool crazy thin or crazy thick or fleeced or not fleeced or whatever you need it to be. And So if that saves any of you guys from having freezing cold feet by just realizing like not all wool socks are built to be cold weather socks, or that they're not warm when wet, they're relatively warm when wet, I guess would be a better
warmer than they could be.
Yeah, warmer than another fabric when wet. But you know, as someone who's also dealt with frostbite, wearing wool socks, if your wool socks are wet, they're not warm.
Yeah, they still feel cold.
They're still very cold. Anywho, so I recently was on a podcast, someone else's podcast, and the question was posed to me: what changes when you're doing a solo hike versus a hike with friends or other people on the Outdoor Vitals team per se, mentality wise, and what changes preparation wise? And I mean, it's a very interesting thing, because I personally really, really enjoy solo trips. I am not saying that I only ever want to do solo trips by any means, so don't like confuse those.
You're not
right?
against
Yeah.
doing more than the solo
Yeah.
human being trips.
Yeah, like I've talked to people that literally have told me like I would never backpack solo. I have no interest in that.
Yeah.
But what I've seen is actually a lot of people do have interest in that. But I think a lot of people are very nervous to approach it. And it's like an alluring thing. Like it's almost, what's interesting to me is solo backpacking, it doesn't seem like it, how to say it, like I don't want to like spoil anything here, but like I don't have a big, like massive difference in preparation or thought, or like I don't know, like whether I'm going solo or with someone. And I think that comes from time and number of nights outside, or some of those kinds of things. There are differences, which we're going to get into, but like, yeah, I've definitely talked to people that are just like, I'll never do it. I've talked to other people that like almost only solo backpack and hike. But for me personally, I guess the reasons why I would go solo. One, I don't have enough cool friends that want to come with me. Two, I really, really like the experience of isolation occasionally. It doesn't happen that often in life anymore, between the noise of whatever, work, family, electronics, TV, you know, just fill in the blank, right? So it's an interesting thing that, you know, I try to seek that out. Like sometimes it's running for an hour a day or a mountain bike ride, but sometimes it's like sun up to sundown, 4 days straight of solo backpacking, and you just can't replicate what you get by being in those conditions and situations and not like influenced by any outside party. As much as I like to backpack with people, there is an outside influence for everyone's personality that's always running. For me, it might be like, how's everyone doing? Like almost like a data bear approach of like, you know, how's so-and-so doing? Is he dragging? Is he getting enough electrolytes? And is this guy doing okay? Or maybe it's just like some other complete dynamic, but there's always, I think, more processes running in the background when I'm with a group. Whereas when I'm solo, I get a very serious and real disconnect with everything else and reconnect with myself, you know? I don't know if that's making a ton of sense. Why do you solo backpack?
Well, I mean, I'll say it does make sense. I mean, I think the processor thing you said is a pretty good way of describing it. If you think in terms of like a processor, like in terms of old computers, they had a few processes going on, right? And the solo trips are just kind of like shutting off a bunch of those other processes. Doesn't, like, a process is kind of agnostic. It's not good or bad. Think of it that way. It's like, it's just processes going on. Your awareness of other people, whether that's, okay, do I need to not bump into the person in front of me, or do I need to walk faster so the person behind me doesn't bump into me? Like those are just constant things that are aware, your mind is aware of when you're in a group, to the more like in-depth processes of, is so-and-so keeping pace, or are they having a good time, or are we agreeing on the route, or the the mileage, the pace, and those things. Those are all processes. I think that makes sense. It's good way of describing it. Why I enjoy going solo is pretty similar to you. It's the complete isolation and disconnection. There's less processes going on, therefore I can feel more disconnected and kind of more focused, if not like completely focused on just what I'm doing, where I am, and my own thoughts. I think the biggest differences with being solo versus not are mostly like mental and emotional, and they're more centered around just like the experience. It's a different experience. Much of the aesthetics or the appearance of that trip in the execution, the planning, the gear, the routes, like they would look pretty similar, but what's going on inside is a lot different. Not to say that some of those things aren't different as well, but yeah, I enjoy kind of just being in my thoughts and having the freedom or latitude to explore a thought, if that thought is like that I want to pick up a pace or cover a certain distance or go off the trail or never be on a trail, or go see what's over into another basin, or just things like that there's no social factors in decision making. And so I think I really enjoy those aspects.
Yeah, when you're solo hiking, you set your own pace, you set your own tone, you set your own expectations, you set your own outcome, really, right? Mm-hmm. And so like you have complete control of what you put in and what you get out, and I think that's unique, right? Because whether you realize it or not, I think every person is a somebody to someone else. And what I mean by that is like, you put me in a group of people, I may or may not struggle to be silent and just like not try to initiate a conversation or keep a conversation going, right? Like, I may I doubt that if you're hiking with me, you're going to get big gaps of no conversation, unless you're doing like whatever, like a 4 or 5 day hike with me. And at that point I'll run out of things to say. Right. Yeah. But like, there's a significant, difference when I'm just me being 100% authentic me, because I don't need to be anything to anyone else around me. You're so isolated in the woods hiking, right? Like no one's watching you, no one's doing anything. So, there's an interesting difference in that. Like, I don't know, like sometimes you might just see something like, man, that is super unique. Like I want to stop and look at that and think about something. And there's no one else to say one way or the other. There's no one else saying like, oh yeah, that looks just like this, and I've seen that before. There's no one to say like any other source, right? But there's also this element to me that is unique in the sense that like that's like kind of the mental emotional side, right? But there's also like this other side that's like the real physical side of that is like, to me, if it can make you feel a bit more alive and in tune. Mm-hmm. Consequences do go up, unless you're backpacking a mile from the car or something like that. Like if you're actually backpacking into wilderness areas that you can't just get in and out of in a quick hurry, consequences go up. And so that also like plays this different, interesting aspect to it all that I don't know if I've learned to enjoy it or if I've always enjoyed it, but like it's intriguing to me enough that like, and I do enjoy that aspect because it pushes me outside of a comfort zone. And when I step outside of a comfort zone, at first, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but like when you finish it, it's pretty cool, right? Like,
I definitely relate to that. I'd say it adds to an increased level of the feeling of adventure or removal from society, or just more disconnect, more remoteness. It's like by being alone, I don't know what, I couldn't put a number on it, but it's like double the distance from the road, right? If it's like a 4-mile hike, it's more like an 8-mile hike, because you know you're alone. You're just more remote, and all the consequences they all come back to me, right? Like there's no one else's decisions or actions are going to create consequences that I have to deal with other than my own decisions and actions. And so I do enjoy that. That's probably one of the things I enjoy the most, is there's a more, not like risky in a bad way, but a little more risk, a little more importance to what I do and how I do it. And it's a good.
I mean, you could literally take tonight as an example. I sat down here. I tried to put my stove together on my fuel canister, and wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. I think it was a brand new fuel canister, and it was just threaded wrong from the factory. And in this situation, I said, "Hey, Brigham, when you're done with your stove, like let me warm up some water so I can have dinner." In a solo situation, let's say I was on a 100-mile hike, and my stove does not function, like that changes a lot of things. It does, like the consequence does go up. And it can be simple things like that you wouldn't think of. It can be other things that are very much top of mind and you're aware of, but the consequence goes up. And with that, what I find is the level of potential focus and attention you have to give goes up. And with focus and attention concentrated like that, that's the breakaway. Like that's the real disconnect. It's like, it's the sense of flow. If you're familiar with that terminology of like finding yourself in a flow state. Like I can find myself in a flow state backpacking, at times. Now, I don't say it's like start to finish on a day or something like that. Like I can find myself in a flow state where I'm just totally 100% present to that moment. Say running or mountain biking. Like if I don't pay attention right now, I could wreck and break my shoulder again, right? I could, so those like concentrated focuses are what create that disconnect and the complete focus on being present. And that has to kind of come with some level of potential heightened consequences. But anyways, there's a ton of benefits, in my opinion, of hiking solo. I really think for some people it could be a rite of passage. For some other people, it could just be something they do regularly as a source of I don't know, meditation or benefit to them. Hopefully by now you've got some ideas of why we like to do it. So what do you remember the first time you solo backpacked or hiked or camped alone?
No, it's been too long. It's been too long.
That's me too. I cannot remember. And I think it's because for me, as I try to pinpoint why, I think it's because it was gradual. Just like we would tell anyone that's starting to backpack to be like, all right, you can camp next to your car, or camp a few hundred yards away from your car, and then go a mile away from your car, and then go 4 miles. I think the same thing kind of happened with me solo. Like, I mean, funny story. I can remember like in college, car camping solo. I wanted to go out on a hunt, and I went out and slept in the back of an old 4Runner. And I'll just never forget this, because I was asleep in the 4Runner. For whatever reason, this campsite spooked me a little. Like, and again, it's probably because I'm 20-year-old kid and camping alone in the woods, and it was a little bit new territory. And I went to bed. I'm in a car, locked up in a car, and I wake up in the middle of the night to my entire car shaking, rocking back and forth, and I you know, what else do you think? Like, you start freaking out. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there's a bear trying to get into my car or something, you know, and I'm going through all these things, and finally I, you know, get a hold of a flashlight and I shine it out kind of my tinted back windows, and I see this cow scratching their head on my bumper, and just a cow that was up on the mountain, right, and just rocking my entire car, right. But I think that's like that whole process, though, again, that's probably why, is like I started solo camping in my car, and then I started solo camping outside my car or a little ways down a trail or something. And so I don't think I have like this big, hey, I did this trip and it was the first time I solo backpacked, and I'll remember it forever.
So take that example, though, like whether that was your first one or not, you know, they're like, when I hear that, I think that like that interesting situation like created a really good opportunity to like make a big jump in confidence, because
the worst happened.
Especially like, say that was your first time, like that was your first solo trip, right?
Yeah.
Something kind of scary or whatever happened, right? Like something that was disturbing at best, right? And then to be able to have, quote, gotten through it, or it's more of just like that, oh, it's just some cows.
Yeah.
So you had a moment, you know, let's call it a moment of fear or something, and then a realization, and then like, okay. Like that, not everybody's going to have that on their first time going on a solo trip, whether it's backpacking or car camping. And that,
right.
and that's still valuable, because let's say, you know, there's no exciting event that happens. Well, you know, somebody still is going to mentally catalog like, hey, I went and nothing happened.
Yeah.
Like, that's great. But it's almost like, hey, maybe something kind of scary happened and everything was just fine anyway. It's like, might give you a little bit of a jump start in terms of that of a progression of, you know, the endeavors somebody takes by themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Like I'm sure you could probably think of different times when different, whatever, sticks have cracked or animals have come through your campsite or something like that. And if the same thing happened again, you've got a base of situational knowledge, experience, whatever, that helps you not get overly freaked out about it, right? Like, right. I've said this many times, but fear is unknowns, right? And so the more times you go out, the less fears you have, the less unknowns you have, and then the less fears you have. But, so neither of us can remember our first times, you know, solo backpacking. I think that the only thing I can remember is talking to some friends, you know, a decade ago and being like, yeah, I'm going to go backpack. And they're like, well, who are you going with? And it's like, nobody. And they're like,
right.
I could never do that. And that was like, almost in some ways, that was a shocker to me. I'm like, what do you mean you could never do that?
Yeah.
And they're like, I could never camp alone. There's no way I could do that. And I was like, that was like the first time I was like, oh, it's interesting. I didn't realize that, like, it wasn't just like a thing people did, a progressive thing that people did. Now, my favorite part about solo backpacking is, you know, we just got through the Halloween season. You get invites to watch scary movies, and it's a real good excuse to say, hey, I go solo backpacking all the time. I'm not putting scary movie garbage into my head to have that come back to me when I'm 10 miles out from a car in the middle of the night and be like, holy crap, remember the Blair Witch Project? Yeah, I feel like that's happening, or whatever. So it's a good excuse. If you solo backpack, you can always pull that card.
True.
Hey, do you solo backpack? All right, then you don't get to say whether we watch scary movies or not. I'm not a big scary movie guy. I don't hate them. I borderline hate them. Okay, so backpack. We've solo backpacked a long time. So we've just, like, both of us just came off some different experiences and opportunities to do some solo backpacking. I guess walk me through, like, when you start to prepare to go on a solo hunt. I I know that for you, it's, I'm going to guess for you that there's not a massive amount of differences, but maybe try to, one, really try to highlight what's different about preparation and execution, but also like with the frame of mind of maybe people listening haven't done this either. So like, don't gloss over some things that might be second nature now, but weren't years ago or something, if you can. So you're preparing to go on a solo hunt. How do you start preparing, and and then work that into execution?
I mean, I just want to make plans of where I'm going and become familiar, with that via looking at digital tools like different mapping applications and I think oftentimes I look at the same things a bunch of times. Part of that is it's fun. It gets me excited for it. And then the other side is that it puts to memory, just like geographic, or geospatial recognition. And I don't know. So it's basically familiarizing myself with where I'm going, how I'm getting there, the route and all those things before I even get there. So that, especially if somebody's not doing this a lot, like that will alleviate some unknowns, build some confidence. So I definitely do that. Gear wise, nothing really changes. But I guess I'll give, like a second thought or, and a little bit of extra consideration to things that could affect like my safety or health. And not like in a catastrophic way, just give it a little more attention of, I'll double check my, first aid kit that's more than first aid stuff. Just make sure that I've got any medications that I have, or anything that I would want to. Let's say I want to deal with a blister, which I almost never have to deal with in the wilderness anyway. But just because I know that if that does happen, I'm going to be by myself, and I want to be there. I don't want to have to quit because something happens. Mm-hmm. So it's just like stuff like that, and then just having that in mind that, hey, I'm my own person, so I can't rely on somebody else for those things. But the gear itself, the items really don't change. I make sure I have my inReach with me. Make sure I've got, a battery bank so that I can keep my, my inReach and my phone headlamps charged throughout the whole time. That's like in preparation before I get there.
Any you kind of talked about like walking through what you're about to do and the terrain and the trail. Any other preparation as far as like you personally or mentally, or others? Do you involve more people, or do you feel like you need to, or?
To an extent. For me, really all I need to do is just, tell my wife where I'm going and my expected timeline.
Yeah.
And so I say things, I'll say, okay, well, I'm going, driving to another state. So I go this way. This is kind of the last town that I stop and get gas. And then I'm going up, this road and starting at this trailhead, and I'll be in this general area for a week or so, and that's about as best as I can do, because although I may have places planned out where I want to spend each night, like it doesn't always end up that way.
Right.
So, and then
I think that it can't be underestimated to the value of an inReach, right? Like for solo, especially like not next to home, not knowing what kind of cellular signal you're going to have. An inReach, like just, I don't want to say it's the easy button, but it like, because I think I also believe in things like redundancies and things, but like, man, it does make a significant difference. And there's a lot of exciting things actually developing around that, right? Like obviously Apple just released some updates so that some of their newer phones can now potentially text off of a phone to a satellite. That's a huge deal, right? That's a redundancy for you as an Apple user, at least. Like, now you have an inReach that is very trustworthy, but you also have a cell phone that has a redundancy ability to message out. I don't know. I've listened to some things recently with Starlink that essentially it's getting better and better, and that it's not far from cellular ability, cell phone level ability.
That's cool.
So hopefully we'll have some redundancies there in the future. But I think me and you both rely. I mean, so for me, for preparation, I try to, I'm going to tell someone, hey, I'm going to send you at least a preset message every day. Checking in, and just because a preset message, at least with the Garmin devices, is a free message. And so I'm at least going to say, hey, I have these preset messages that might say, hey, everything's going well. I'm right here right now. And then I might have another one that says like, hey, I'm at camp right now. So I think those are smart. And they're available to us. And so we may, we take advantage of those.
Well, what's good about, cause I do the same preset check-in message, just says checking in, all good here. Like, the nice thing about like talking that through with whoever before you leave is that if you think about if something were to go wrong, like you can't even imagine like every scenario that could go wrong, but I think it's reasonable that there could be a scenario where something happened, regardless of how catastrophic or not it is, but you might need some help, or it's good for the third party, the other party that is back home, to know that thing happened, but they can know that maybe there's a problem without you saying that there's a problem. So like, for example, the check-in message, like, I communicate, hey, expect to see a check-in message, right? Say it's once a day. Well, if they don't see that check-in message, at least, maybe it's getting the end of the day, that person will be like, I haven't seen a check-in message. They'll be prompted to shoot one to you. Or me. And in that case, it's just like, I got sidetracked. I was really focused on something and, just kind of forgot. And then it's a quick, sorry, everything's fine. I'm good. But that's like on the good side. But like if actually, in fact, maybe whatever, you were separated from your inReach. Right?
Something bad happens and you're not able to reach out.
So it's a very direct tool, but it also is passive in that, like, if you have that communication before the trip, then like not receiving a check-in message is a message in and of itself of some sort.
The last thing I did too on the Wind River hike is I had a couple of people that were watching I was doing a what do you call it, tracking on it, and it uses I did a 4-day trip, and I finished that trip. I had to have still had 40% on that Garmin inReach Mini 2, and I was tracking all day.
Is that on one charge?
Yes. I didn't charge it.
I still have the original Mini, so it's definitely not that level.
It's impressive. Absolutely. So I was doing, and I think it was only hour, might have been 15, I don't know if I remember if it was 15 or hour long intervals. That's a big difference between those two, but still. So if someone was to hypothetically have looked at my tracker and they see it not moving for 2 hours, or something, and they know what I'm trying to do, they could probably shoot me a message and say, hey, you're getting off schedule.
Yeah.
You know, are you okay? Or maybe I don't move for 3-4 hours. You know, they can know for sure then that there's an issue. So I also use that as an additional built-in safe feature. But
yeah.
So there's a lot of ways to use the Garmin InReach or other potential services. I didn't even talk to you about this, but my brother had a different satellite GPS provider. I don't know. I guess I could probably say this. I don't know whether it was a problem or not, I guess. But I do know that people were not getting his messages and he was not getting their messages. And it became a thing where I ended up having to message on my device to say things, but it was with a Zoleo. His Zoleo he had one. I don't know. I didn't actually chase that down, but it was. I will say what I do know is that Zoleo gives you like some kind of a significant more amount of messages if you use their app to message off of. But once you've like linked your telephone number to the app, it forces all messages to go into the app, and so you don't just get a text anymore if you're on the other end of it. I don't know all the ins and outs, but I know that it was, he was less than impressed. I was less than impressed,
Yeah.
but I've never used it for myself, so I can't fully express that. So maybe if you've used a Zoleo and had great usage of it, or maybe understand what might have happened between him, maybe just drop that in the comments if you're on YouTube. But, but apart from messaging devices, for me, as far as on the preparation side, I'm trying to tell people where I'm going, when I'm expected out. I'll send them, typically I'll send them the tracks, the GPS track of where I'm going to be headed. If it's a big thing. If it's not a big thing, then it's like, okay, I'll tell them whatever, here's the pin of where I'm going to camp that night, and you can kind of piece together the rest. But if it's a 3-4 day thing, I'll give them, an actual GPS track of everything. But I've also, like, as far as redundancies go, I've started to, because I'm not a big paper map guy. I can totally use and utilize a paper map, but I just don't have them around. I don't print them out. So for me, for redundancy lately, the redundancy has been, cell phone. I have the Garmin InReach, which I think you can kind of slightly do some stuff there, but then I've been uploading the files to my watch, and that came in huge in the Wind Rivers because my map app completely failed on me. Like, it did an update and it didn't work properly or something, and I didn't realize that until I'm already out in the wilderness, and so I navigated the entire time off of my watch. That could have been a huge deal. It could have been a no deal. But thankfully it was a no deal because I had some redundancy built in there. Much like you. I mean, obviously, I think it's like probably expected that you're going to pay more attention to what's in a first aid kit. You're going to be really thorough about using a check. I'm much more thorough about using a checklist, especially when solo, because there's you don't want to mess or miss something there. I'm this way all the time, but like I want to have multiple sources for a fire starter. I want to have a fire. I don't know I can't think of what you'd call that. Like an assist, a fire starter, not just a lighter, but like something to light.
Yeah, a tinder.
A tinder. But man, like when I really peel back a lot of the layers on going solo. Okay, so here's one. I think that there is a little bit of preparation mentally that I do when I'm solo, because for me the big question mark is still, depending on where I'm at, like bears, right? Like bears are probably the most frightening thing out here. I don't necessarily think about cougars. I don't necessarily think about coyotes or anything else, but bears, I personally, I will think about them. And so for me, it's like I'm going to research what kind of bears in the area. I'm going to be aware of that, and then I'm going to take the proper precautions because, and here's why. Like, I've been in a lot of areas that I'm like, there's no bear problem here. Like, there's no sighted bear problem. There's no whatever. But I know that when I climb in that tent at the end of the night, if I've properly taken care of my camp, then I can uncheck and totally rest easy. There's not a reason for a bear to come to my tent and have anything to do with me.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, like, I'm way more worried about a bear when I'm like anywhere near, let's say, a frequently used campsite.
Yeah.
You know, so that's kind of that's a good one to think about, like in planning, is where you're going. You know, are there any of those frequently or highly used routes or areas? Because like that's most likely where the bears will be habituated. You know, likewise, I'm also trying to look at, like, you know, you can also at the same time realize, man, this isn't anywhere close to a place. So, you know, it's not, it gives some peace of mind at night, you know, when going to bed, to just like, I've thought this through, you know, there isn't, you know, any kind of campground or campsite within, you know, 10 miles of here. And, there's not really any reason for a bear to target where I'm sleeping tonight.
Right. And I think if you do your parts to keep a bear clean, bear safe campsite, I can climb into my tent and I can relax. I can actually relax. Now, if I was to climb into my tent, and I mean, there's been times like I'll climb into my tent, I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot I've got candy in the hip belt pocket of my, you know, like I've already taken, you know, and sometimes you got to like really be like, all right, is this okay or is this not okay? Do I need to go take it out? Because there's times, and I would say I honestly, and this is probably bad to say, but if I'm with a group, it's easier to be like, it's probably okay. If I'm solo, I'm probably like, I'm just going to sleep better if I take care of this right now. And that's probably bad to say, but like, you know, because usually for me, it's not even candy. It's like, maybe it's sunscreen or toothpaste or something like that. That's like, this puts off an odor, you know, to be bear safe. Technically you should be putting that with your bear hang or however you're managing your stuff. And so I'm more attentive solo hiking to keeping a cleaner camp, per se, and following what I need to follow for those areas. I think this could come up, and maybe it's worth talking about, maybe it's not, but you know, bear spray or a sidearm, since we're just on this subject.
Like in the preparation?
Yeah, like do you ever use those? Do you ever like
I've never taken bear spray anywhere in my life.
Really? I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
A freaking rebel over here.
I've handled it. I've sprayed it, you know.
Oh, have you?
To experiment with it.
To realize that it's freaking not impressive.
And, you know, so it's going to be a personal decision for each individual. But yeah, the bear, and I don't want to like really go into it, but yeah, I've tested it, experimented with it, just meaning like taking it out, flipping the thing or whatever, and, you know, discharging the spray. But that was more of a familiarity thing and wasn't to prove or disprove anything. It was just like, okay, this is a can of bear spray and this is how it works. I want to see how it works. Incidentally, and this did not sway my future choice to never use it, but the funny thing about that time is like, after I sprayed it, you know, probably a minute went by. I turned around and walked the other way, like to be out of the spray area. And like within a minute it hit, you know, like the remaining mist, whatever, traveled the, I don't know, 20 yards or whatever back the direction that I was walking away. And like it it got into my nose and my eyes or whatever happens. And it was not like having been sprayed with bear spray, but it definitely immediately irritated my nose and eyes.
Yeah.
So that's just a anecdotal thing, but no, I've never carried bear spray anywhere ever. Sometimes I take a firearm, but I don't know. It's hard to say what frequency, maybe less than half.
Well, you probably only take it in grizzly country, not black bear country.
Yeah. Solo. Yeah. If I am solo, I will take one in grizzly country, and I still may or may not anywhere else. You know what I mean? That's solo.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very similar to you, but to build on that, I think just there's a lot of, like, bear spray obviously has its place, and there's tests out there, and there's studies out there, and there's usage out there. Like, you can prove that it works. Like, that's not why you're not using it, right? I think that the difference, though, is, like, for maybe a lot of people, it is the better, safer option. But for you, you've got a lot of experience with firearms. You have real world experience with firearms, high stress situation with firearms. And so, like, it makes sense. And I think that's the big thing is, if my thing would be, if you're taking a firearm over bear spray, you better dang well know how you perform under pressure, and be very familiar with equipment, and be very, otherwise you're better off with a point and shoot can that is not, you don't miss per se with it. I mean, you probably can miss, like, but it's like, it's a cloud. It's not a small projectile flying through the air, right? It's a different situation. So, because of that, I think it's totally justified, because there's people out there that have a strong opinion one way or the other. And I don't think there shouldn't be a strong opinion one way or the other. It should be very much individualistic, in my opinion, based off of your abilities, your opinions, your experiences, your those kinds of things. That's where I stand with it, and
it's very reasonable. And I'd also say is, like, the spray versus the gun thing is, I would never. I think it'd be safe to say that I've never taken a firearm with me in lieu of spray, like instead of spray. Like,
okay,
a scenario where I take nothing is the same as not. The scenario I don't take a firearm is the same scenario I wouldn't take spray. You know what I mean? Like, the decision process is the same for me.
Yeah, and I would say, like I don't know, last little tiny excerpt on this is, like, for me, it's like, it is your choice. Hopefully, if you're doing everything right, you never have an encounter, right? Like, for instance, on that Wind River hike, when I was hiking through some of the thicker areas, like thicker treed or brushed, I would just, and I'm solo, right? So it's not like I can talk to someone to make noise. Yeah. So I'd take my phone and I'd turn on music or something like that to create some noise. Or I'd take my trekking poles, and this might be silly, this might not. I don't know. It's just something I do. But I would, like, take my trekking poles, and I'd be sure to, instead of just setting them in the dirt, I'd set them on top of rocks so they'd make a little click or a noise. Yeah. And because what I'm trying to do is just make some noise as I'm going through brushy areas, because that's a potential risk when you're solo, right? Is that you sneak up on a bear, right? Yeah. Especially I'm talking about grizzlies or something, right? But so there's some little things like that I'll do, but for me, like, I'm gonna sleep better at night, and with my experiences, life experiences, everything like that, with a sidearm in grizzly country than I am going to with bear spray. And so, like, if I made the wrong choice, hopefully that's just on me, like, but I am confident in that, and I'm good with that, right? But I'm much the same with you. I pretty much don't take bear spray or worry or do much other than keep a very clean camp and stuff like that if I'm in black bear country. I would say it's 100% of the time, but it's majority.
Another thing that like I didn't ever have any control of, or I don't think anybody else would have control of either, but it certainly dispels of or reduces a lot of that fear or discomfort is like actually seeing bears in the mountains. Like some of the coolest experiences I've ever had was watching bears like close proximity that did not know I was there. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Watching them like just nose around, looking for bugs and grubs and worms and ants, just curiously like ripping open logs. And like they had no idea I was there. But I could hear them breathing, could see, watch them, could see, you could hear their claws dig into a stump or a log and like, or just, just kind of passing by them totally accidentally, like one year, like the first bear I ever saw was up in Idaho. We'd been out on a kind of a day hike from where we were camped up to some higher lakes and did some fishing and hiked back. And when I was the first one back into camp, and there was a bear just standing there.
In your camp?
In the camp. Oh. Well, he was probably like, I guess you couldn't say like in the camp, but 20 yards, just call it like outside the established area. He was probably 15, 20 yards from my tent.
Was that, do you think he was there because of, he's trying to be a little nosy?
He had been in the camp for sure because my dad had this, like those water bottles, like sports squirt bottles,
Yeah.
And it was in a red, like insulated case, and it had like a lanyard on it, and he had just hung that on a tree branch. And the bear like had bitten the bottom of the bottle. There were 4 holes, canine holes, 2 above the bottom rim and 2 below the bottom rim. And it just like did a curiosity bite. And like, so once I like, saw the bear and it didn't run away, it was just like slowly walking away and like looked back at me one time and I just watched it. It went away, and so then I was just kind of like
wait, it's not around. Just going to charge and eat me the second I see a bear, like.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm saying is like realizing that was one of those moments, kind of like the cow bumping your car, where like supposedly maybe something that could be scary in that moment, realize like, hey, a bear sighting is not like an attack.
Yeah.
Like a bear, the presence of a bear does not equal bear attack or bear harm. Like, so I just was like, oh, what an interesting kind of cool situation. It like kind of raised the hair on the back of my neck a little bit. So I looked around for, just to see what the bear tracks looked like. And then I noticed the water bottle was dripping from the bottom. I was like, no way. So I like went up and looked at it and saw the holes, and there was still water dripping out of the holes from when it bit the bottle. And anyway, but like things like that, just seeing it
relaxes you for
that
sure.
Thing is, it just your brain remembers that, and you realize, okay, it's not always a bad thing. It's not necessarily a problem or a huge threat. Like, those things help. Can't control them, but
it does help because people, maybe the only bear they've ever seen is like in a zoo, and a bear can get pretty freaking huge in a zoo.
Yes, the biggest bears I've seen have been in zoos.
Freaking huge, right? And so like for me, and I never intended this episode to just go down a bear rabbit hole here, but like it's interesting. For me, I had seen. I'm trying to think of the timeline, but I'm pretty sure like some of the first bear I'd really seen or paid attention to was I went to like Bear World in Idaho, and you're driving around and you're seeing like really old massive captive black bears, and you're like, dang, those are pretty good sized bears. And then I went to Alaska, and I literally bumped into a grizzly at 10 yards, and the thing stood up on its hind legs, and it was huge. It was a huge bear. And then fast forward a few years down the road, and I bump into a black bear. You know, I'm literally standing over a pile of fish guts, and this black bear comes walking right into me in a camp. So, you know, it's like habituated bear here. Like, he's literally, anyways. But yeah, like seeing him, you're like, okay, he is less than a third of the size of the grizzly I've seen. And like, or this last fall, I observed a bear literally walk within 20 yards of an elk herd. You know, you got like small cow elk in that herd, and this bear just walked past him. You know, it does something to the psyche to be like, okay, one, I can see how big the bear is compared to the elk. Yeah. Two, I can see them just like, they don't care about each other. The elk didn't care about the bear. The bear didn't care about the elk. And I was like, what the freak just happened?
Yeah, you know, like, bears don't just walk around seeing red, like needing to attack every living thing, you know. And those are good experiences to just like tone down the irrational thoughts that are they're just conditioned from social
from Hollywood per se, you know, or something. So, case in point, I find it, if I keep a clean camp, I'm better. If I'm in grizzly country, I take precautions for grizzly country. And I am pretty good at being able to climb in that tent and mentally, wall up and just be like, I'm in my sanctuary. Like, I climb in my tent frequently, and I just feel at home. Yeah. And there's nothing else to that than time and experience, right? Like, I don't know how many nights I've spent in a 40th one-person tent, or a version, or a million different versions of a 40th one-person tent. Yeah. But like, I climb in that thing, and it feels like my cabin away from home, and it's very interesting. I've noted that a handful of times over the years, that I climb in and I feel very comfortable and safe and at home, but that can only come from me spending a lot of nights in that thing. Yeah. So back to just preparation or execution of anything solo, and I have not been watching time, but
it's good conversation.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what we'd be doing if we weren't doing this. So hope you guys are enjoying this. If not, turn up the speed. If not, I guess we'll catch you on the next one. Other preparation things for solo trips. I think the answer that I want to give, but I know it's not like the sexy answer. Like, it's not like you do this and all your problems are solved. It's, you know, it's just the more you backpack, the less you will care. You'll become almost agnostic to solo versus group backpacking. Yeah. There are some differences. Like, there will always be some differences, and there always should be some differences, right? But like, in preparation or mindset, or like, you know, being maybe a little more alert. Like, for instance, I might climb in that tent and put in some noise canceling headphones tonight and zonk out. I probably wouldn't do that if I was solo. I'd probably keep things out of my ears, or use like the bone conductive headphones or something if I wanted to listen to something, or just turn your phone on. You can put it next to your head on very low volume so that my ears can stay open. But if I'm in a group, like, there's always going to be things like that. But the biggest thing is, the more you go, the more agnostic you'll become to solo backpacking, because you'll feel comfortable with the entire situation.
The interesting thing about that is it like numbs away what I would say is like what I think most people would categorize as fears. But at the same time, like, for me, it heightens all my senses and awareness of like that natural environment. Mm-hmm. Not a paranoid thing, but it's like it's like maybe shutting off some of those other processes, like people, Like when you stop worrying about XYZ because you've done it and you're familiar, it's like when you get in your tent. Like you're in that tent, it feels that way because it's familiar, and there's a mental habituation of like being able to relax once you're in there. So once the more time you spend out in the mountains, even with a group, that starts to happen. Like you start to kind of shut off some of those other processes of discomfort to where when you go solo, it doesn't feel any different. And so when those processes are kind of shut off, you can actually kind of actuate some new processes that makes it more enjoyable for me, where I'm like, I become really in tune with that place. You know, you start to notice birds making noises in certain places, or you know, like you start to like want to hear coyotes howling in the distance or wolves. Like that's an incredible experience. So yeah,
it's so interesting, man. You know, like, because like you bring up wolves. Well, two things. You talk about like climbing in your tent, and that, man, I totally had like a baby blanket moment of me like in that specific 15-degree top quilt that's in that tent right now next to me. Like I climb in that sucker, and it feels like I'm coming home, right? It's like, and it just kind of reminded me of like a baby blanket, right? Like a baby blanket, like people get attached to it, and there's like I don't think like, obviously it's a different attachment when you're a baby versus an adult, but like there's a comfort there. But like even you bring up wolves, like I've done a whole lot less backpacking in wolf country. And what's so interesting to me is living in Utah and talking with Utahns. I have heard so many, what I feel like is somewhat crazy and ridiculous things about wolves. That's kind of mind-boggling. Like mind-boggling. Like I have literally heard some stories that I'm like, if that's true, that's terrifying. But it can't be true.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, and so it's hard to know what to believe until you are in those situations for yourself.
It's almost just like,
or you seek out truth in some way.
Yeah, it's not worth even trying to believe it or disbelieve it. It's just better to just discard it and just go have your experience.
Yeah.
Someday you might be in the mountains, you might hear wolves out there, and you'll be like, wow, that was really cool.
Yeah.
You know, and now you're on a much more positive mindset than
like,
something speculating about from a third or fourth or fifth person story that.
Dude, the story that I'm like recalling too, like as I'm thinking about it, because I heard it when I was probably a teenager from my dad, he's a chiropractor, and so he would hear stories from people, and that's all. Like, dude, I swear, as much as he like cracked people's bones as a chiropractor, he was there to like listen to people, you know. And he's from a small town. He grew up in a small town. He practiced in a small town, and so like long appointments, and he built a lot of relationships with people. But I think he'd hear wild stories, and who knows, like what kind of old whatever cowboys telling him stories about freaking wolves like hunting down people, you know. And I'm just thinking back about like the story that I've been told, and I'm like, how? There's no ground for reality there that aligns with my decades of experience in the outdoors and interaction with every other species of animals in existence that I've bumped into. Yeah. This story is like, but like I've still cataloged that story. It's funny. It like I'm just kind of laughing about it now, but I think everyone does that. Like if someone tells you a wild story, even if you don't believe it, oftentimes you remember it.
You remember it, and then when you are alone in the mountains in the dark,
that's when it goes back.
The thought's going to come back, and rationale is not going to enter into your mind. Right. You're going to feel like the safe thing to do is to embrace that thought and like,
you have to respect it.
I got to get the heck out of here because that could happen. Like that's the thought process that can occur.
Right. I guess just on this topic. Any times, any thoughts or stories or whatever of times when maybe you've had something happen at night, not that it was like dangerous, but just that it freaked you out or spooked you or something like that?
It's not a backcountry story. It's all right. So I think for my 12th, when I was, I think, turning 12, my dad took me on a fishing trip to Alaska. And we had flown up. I just remember we had to drive. We arrived at the airport really late or really early in the morning, but we had to like drive, down and around the peninsula to get to where we were going. I think to catch like a float plane or something. But we knew we weren't going to make the whole drive. My dad just wanted to kind of make some headway and then pull over and sleep. So we're in this rental car. We've got all our stuff, and we pulled over on the side of the highway. And so we're just sleeping in the front seats of this rental car, and I woke up sometime in the early morning. I remember like it was just barely light outside, like way before first light, but just barely light. But what woke me up was what in my mind, I'm in Alaska. I'm like not quite 12 yet. Just had to have been a bear growling at the car, And so I woke up to that noise and was like pretty startled and, didn't want to move, kind of like Jurassic Park. But then after like coming to being awake for maybe a minute or so, I realized it was just my dad snoring. My dad's a horrible snorer. But like it was such a deep, slow snore that like my mind, in my sleep went straight to massive grizzly bear, and
yeah.
But it was one of those moments where it's like, oh, I got massively increased levels of fear, and then it just dropped away when I realized it's just my dad snoring.
Yeah. It happens. Like I can relate to that. It's funny that, one of the stories I shared and the story you shared were both inside of a car when we got startled the most.
Yeah.
One that comes to mind for me is I was actually out elk hunting, and I'd seen this elk from where I was at. It was well over a mile away down this massive face off of a mountain. I had to drop like 2,000+ feet, and anyway, so I decided to make a move at nighttime to get closer to it. So I dropped off this. It was horrible. I got ledged up on cliffs and all this stuff. I was sleeping in a hammock, which I will say this. It's been a while since I've slept in a hammock. I'm more comfortable in a tent. Again, that mental like sealed in aspect does something for me mentally. So I don't know. You can be conscious of that if you're a hammock camper and want to do solo and you're nervous. Like for me, I do feel more comfortable in a tent. But anyways, by the time I got to where I felt like I could pitch a tent. Well, I was going into some territory I hadn't been before, and so I went to like this kind of this stand of trees. It wasn't really a stand of trees. It was dark timber. It was dark pine timber. And as I got in there, I was like, man, it's like really moist in here. Like, and I pitched my hammock, and I kind of realized after I'd got the hammock set up, this is about 1 or 2 in the morning. Like it was dumb decision after dumb decision on this night. I maybe realized, I don't know if I realized before or after, but like, I don't know. It was pitch black. There's no moon out, which is why it was so hard for me to get down the mountain. Cause I was, you got one headlamp on, you're getting ledged up on cliffs. And there's absolutely zero moon, and I'm in dark timber. Get my hammock set up. I am absolutely exhausted from an entire day of moving and then moving all the way into well past midnight. Go to sleep, and I couldn't have been asleep for an hour. And I wake up to the corner line on my tarp that's over my tent going and a massive body tearing off through the woods and just slamming into trees and knocking crap down. And oh man, like it was a very abrupt awakening.
Yeah.
I never could see what it was, but I mean, I've since spent more time in that area, and I was sure even that night that it was an elk. I was in elk country and anyways, what's interesting about that is like it did startle me awake. I've never been startled quite that like awake to have your guy line just twinging when you're totally solo in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. I didn't even get out of my hammock. I just, rolled back over and tried to go back to sleep after my heart rate quit racing. Yeah. But the next morning I realized that I was actually really close to a water source. And so obviously it was, and I've spent more time in that area since then. And it's definitely like an elk situation, but it was so dark. I don't think the elk could see me under a dark, like I think it was a dark green hammock or a gray hammock tarp, right? And so like I was just totally camouflaged in me. Yeah. Anyways, you have situations like that. You survive them. You normalize it a bit over time, and any other time I've had rustlings in the night, you don't wake up as on edge, I would say, or as freaked out about it. But well, I don't know where else to go with solo backpacking.
Maybe some, like, if there's any like practical advice, kind of like with the gear and preparation of, like, thinking a little bit, spending a little extra time thinking about things like first aid kits, making sure things are charged. You've got a battery bank or backup batteries. Yeah. I'd say this is more standard practice than anything, because I go out solo more than I go out with anyone else. So the number of trips I do solo is way outnumbers trips I do with other people. Yeah. So it's kind of standard practice, but there's some things that I don't want to happen when I'm out there. And one of those is my pad popping. I'm like pretty obsessive about, clearing my tent site, putting a thin foam pad on the floor of my tent before I put my pad down. I roll up my pad and I put it in its stuff sack, like, just because I have had a tent, pop, and it's
a pad pop,
and in like the teens in temperatures, like that's a miserable night. So yeah. That's not something I want to deal with. So it's like just kind of thinking of things like that.
That's a much more likely thing to happen than most of the worries people have.
Think of the things that are like, that impact what you're there to do on a backpacking trip, or say it's a hunting trip or whatever you're doing. It's like, you're there for a reason. You want to stay there. So think through things that, like, hey, if I just take a couple extra precautionary steps, it reduces a lot of risk of this bad thing happening to this piece of gear. Or, if the weather is anything other than, 0% chance of rain, like on a solo trip, or, I'm still going to take a rain jacket, or at least have a plan for what to do, because I want to stay out there. I want to be out there. I don't want to have a emergency exfiltrate myself, just because I kind of was trying to save too much weight, or, not think things through. Just being a little extra attentive to things like, not letting things blow away. Put something in your pocket instead of set it on the ground. Just so you don't just hike off without something and then derail your plan or your itinerary or whatever, So it's just like a slightly increased level of attentiveness, focus, awareness, being deliberate about what you do. But none of it is centered or even related to, like, fear,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, as I just try to think of any differences, I would agree. It's I don't have any more differences. It's more of just, look, if a pad pops, it sucks whether you're with a group or not with a group, right? So it's like in some of those aspects, it just all to me boils back to experience. If you're interested in solo backpacking, my biggest word of advice would be go backpacking in whatever capacity you already do more often, and you will get to a point where solo backpacking will not be weird, crazy, unique, as scary, or like all those kinds of things will just fade away. Because I could probably go through quite a few things of like little attentive things that I've picked up over the years, but the reality is those are just regular backpacking things that I do with or without being solo. What do you say? I've had a pad that pops really sucks. Yeah. So, bring a pad pop kit or just be extra attentive. That is, I would say you and me both right now. This last year, we have slept mainly on X-Therms, and part of that is for like warmth, right? Even in the summer months, like people always, to me, people might say like, well, you don't need a 7R value pad for the summer. And it's like, well, you don't need a 12R value mattress at home, but you still sleep on one in the summer in a temperature controlled environment. So like the pad to me is like, you can always vent above the pad. But the bigger reason that we talk about frequently is an X-Therm sleeping pad has a 70 denier bottom. Yeah. A more durable bottom. Yep. Which hopefully equates to less potential for popping and more durability. And so like, you've had it, I've had to ski on snow, out of a campsite because my pad wouldn't hold air. I've had other times when my pad was slowly leaking. Dude, there's not much worse than having to blow up your pad every hour on the hour during the night. Yeah. But I kind of digress, I guess. Like, I think just like you said, attentiveness is the biggest thing solo backpacking is, we find ourselves being a little bit more attentive to every step of the process, like staying dry, Yeah, but just be attentive to it. Attentiveness, I think, builds something else that I think is very helpful, which is building habits. Like, just build habits. Let yourself build habits. You don't have to force it. Just over time, if you're attentive, you will build habits. So then it doesn't matter if you're in a group or solo. And some of those habit things that I do that alleviate some thought and some stress in preparation for a trip is actually what comes at the end of a trip. Is like, I'm habitual about doing things with my gear the same way when I'm putting them away, in that it almost like stages for the next trip. So if I'm habitual about that, like, reduces a lot of risk of, something being overlooked or surprises. And it also just builds a lot of confidence knowing that like, this is such a common thing now that it's habit. And now that when I'm out in the mountains by myself, it's just not something I think about. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Where my mind's going next is to talk about like a whole different category of things of like, rain, moisture, it's like, what's the next scariest thing out there? And if it's not animals, it's probably hypothermia. The environment. And so, and that's just a whole different thing. And I don't think we want to get into that, but like, that's it. It's really simple. It really is. You peel back the layers. It's more simple than I think, you think. And I think, the difference between someone maybe listening that's never solo backpacked, watches maybe some of the videos I've put out there that are me solo backpacking and just think like, this dude's crazy, right? Brigham watches these, by the way, and he's like, dude, he's so lame. Like, it's just a friggin' backpacking trip. Why is he like hyping it up on a video, right? But other people watching are like, holy cow, this is so unique. The only difference is just time and experience. And so if that's something that appeals to you to get into solo backpacking, my biggest advice is start where you are, do it more often, do it more frequently, and take slightly bigger steps. If you're only backpacking 3 miles away from a vehicle, backpack 6 miles away from a vehicle and do the same thing. And, if you're going on big group sizes, go with one other buddy one time, so it's just 2 people. And like, you can just baby step your way into this. Yeah. And I think that you'll probably be like me and Brigham, where you get to a point where maybe you don't even remember when the first actual backpacking trip was that you were solo on, because it's just in a massive blend of time spent outside, time spent around animals, time spent around nature, time spent in and outside of your tent or your hammock. It all becomes familiar and becomes less risky, less scary, and then you get to have those benefits of what solo backpacking is, which is, to me, again, it's the ability to go when you want to go and do what you want to do. It's the ability of being able to go and also be totally authentic you and get the experience you want out of a trip and have no other one dictating what you do or don't get out of a trip. So I think there's a ton of benefits for it. I like doing it both. I think you should always do them both. If you're someone who's like, I'm only ever going to do one, maybe consider.
Yeah, I mean, we are closing this, but just an example is, I did everything solo for years. Had started having kids, but still continued to do them solo. Mm-hmm. And then I started taking my kids backpacking on proper backpacking trips when they were 5. And it's like as good as it gets for me. You know what I mean? Like taking my kids backpacking and going in that group setting is so fun, so rewarding. It's and I think in doing so, I'm not trying to do this deliberately, but I think in doing so, I'm conditioning my own kids to build their own experience to where they will feel confident at some point in their life to do the same thing. Like,
oh yeah,
I want to go backpacking. Nobody can go. I'm still going,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. There's not a, if you want to start solo backpacking, I don't necessarily have the easy solution for you, because it does take some time to be comfortable. Like, you can shortcut it by studying and learning and stuff like that, but there's no total replacement. There's never going to be a total replacement for experience in the backcountry. So, yeah, hopefully this was valuable to you guys. I mean, it's an enjoyable conversation. When I'm snoring tonight, Brigham will wake up and think I'm a grizzly, flashback to but no, I think hopefully this inspires some of you guys to realize, like, you may think that you never can solo backpack, and I would totally challenge that. You can absolutely solo backpack. You've just got maybe a few more steps that you're going to take along the way to not make it a crazy, uncomfortable experience for you, unless you want to force your way into that. But I think it can be very much a step-by-step process, and you can get to a point where you're doing solo trips, and then who knows, maybe after a while you're doing solo trips like we do in the winter months, where consequences are much higher. And, and I mean, even in some of those, man, like, I don't want to open a whole other can of worms here, but like, you and me both have done some solo winter camping that, people see it and it just seems absurd. Yeah. And to us, it can feel very much a part of a process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's just like, I've already winter camped this many times and I've already solo camped this many times, just connecting 2 dots. And I think that's what it'll feel like. If you're really interested in pursuing this path, you'll feel like you're connecting dots. But hopefully you guys do that. Hopefully you guys, whatever, take life, live it on your terms, and pursue everything the outdoors has to offer, both in group settings and in solo settings. And if you've got other questions, feel free to write in. You'd write into our support team at Outdoor Vitals, but I am wanting to collect more questions to specifically answer on the podcast. So if you've ever have questions that you want, say, me and Brigham to sit down and talk through and whatnot on the podcast, feel free to just to send that in. You can even say podcast question, enter that in. But wanting to kind of we've done that a little bit in the past, but I really would like to make that a really consistent thing where maybe once a month we really sit down and just answer your guys' specific questions and get into kind of the nitty gritty there. But anyways, if you've not yet subscribed to the podcast, please do so. If you found value in this podcast, feel free to share it. That always helps us to accomplish our goals at Outdoor Vitals and with this podcast, which is just to get more people into the vital outdoors and have people have better experiences in the vital outdoors. So if we did that, appreciate a review or share, and we'll catch you guys on a future episode.